Hello and welcome to the TTI Distribution Download, the podcast where we talk about all things happening in the world of electronic components with the specialists of TTI. And now, your host for the TTI Distribution Download, Paula Renfro.
Welcome back to the TTI Distribution Download, and our returning guest today is Gabe Osorio, specialist with the TTI Transportation Business Unit. We like to call it the TBU. Thanks for coming back, Gabe.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Thanks for having me.
I really enjoy talking transportation with you. You're so passionate about the technology and the possibilities in the market segment. It's contagious.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening for sure.
There is, isn't there? Okay, so I know we have so much to talk about in this segment. We're going to catch up on the state of our country's charging infrastructure and the new news, relatively new news around Tesla's NACS, et cetera. But let's kick off with just what have you been up to in the couple months since we talked to you last? What is new on the scene?
Yeah. It seems like so much every single day, something new out in the marketplace. But one of the really cool experiences I got to participate in late June was a Formula E race in Portland, Oregon. And if you don't know, it's very similar to Formula One, just with an all-electric vehicle platform, obviously. So very exciting. Really cool to see the technology that comes from the Formula E race cars. If you look 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, it took 2 cars to finish almost 30 laps. And today it only takes 1 car to finish those 30 laps. And what's really interesting and cool about that is the technology from inverters and batteries and the battery management system that goes into it, and all of the testing and technology that those guys are putting into and using for those race cars is really evident. And a lot of that technology ends up trickling down into the consumer marketplace. So when you think about all of the EV news for EV commercial cars or commercial vehicles, automotive vehicles, you name it, a lot of it got its start from this Formula E race.
Yeah.
And it's been around for about 10 years, and it's growing in popularity, obviously, I think, with Formula One popularity as well, too. So lots of that out there. We've got some exciting participation, or at least we're excited to start participating more with the ACT Expo as well too.
Yeah, I saw that the other day.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard, it's the Advanced Clean Transportation is what ACT stands for. So a lot of commercial vehicle-minded OEMs and device manufacturers participate in a week-long essentially exposition, showcasing their product, but also a lot of education takes place around the latest and greatest for design, really with a fleet-minded focus, so really heavy on commercial vehicle, last-mile delivery, that kind of thing. But it's grown so much in the last 7 to 10 years, starting off from a small exposition center in Long Beach, California, and now moving to Las Vegas. They've hit the big time and looking for a lot more space.
Cool. So you're giving a shout out to the ACT Expo.
Yeah, absolutely. The other things kind of just happening in the marketplace that I think are exciting is you've seen some price reductions for EV automobiles. So think Tesla's most notably, right? You've seen a lot of price reductions in the market, so a lot more adoption of vehicle, a lot more sales happening of those products, along with other EV manufacturers, or at least other EV platforms like the F-150, some of the VW options, and others out there as well. So again, I think that just goes to further help proliferate EV vehicles in the marketplace by reducing costs and making it a little bit more affordable for customers, which is really exciting. And then along with that, EV sales this year in North America are expected to grow over 1 million vehicles for the first time ever, which is really exciting as well too. So really kind of starting to put their stamp on vehicle sales in the marketplace, which is
so. When you talk about, I'm sorry, backing up just a little bit to the F-150s, because of course we have a lot of those here in Texas. This price decrease, is this because our supply is catching up a bit with demand, and like more specifically for the consumer minded out there also, is there a waiting list?
There used to be. I
Okay.
think as Ford especially has ramped up production of that platform, the Lightning or the F-150 Lightning, it's become much more readily available. Supply chain has improved and eased. It's still an issue out there. It's certainly not fixed, but it has definitely become much more improved, and availability of the vehicles are much greater. And the focus and emphasis that these OEMs are placing on, electrifying their entire fleet offering or product offering in the next 10 to 15 years, it goes a long way in showing that. And I think the reduction in cost along with that goes to speak to better availability of everything from the supply chain, components, the labor, you name it, all of it becoming much more readily available. And really, I think, again, trying to stimulate the demand for those EV vehicles as well too as part of that strategy as well, and quite honestly, probably keeping up with Tesla and as the market leader in EV.
In the same way,
Yep,
yeah.
yep,
So
absolutely.
most of the Ford 150 Lightnings, you think they're going into fleets?
It
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I
Yep,
mean,
okay.
probably right now, I would
For
say
now.
the bulk of those, but certainly there's going to be an adoption by the regular, Joe Schmo consumer, for lack of a better word.
Big techs.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not lost, right? Either that you saw, if you didn't see the first Tesla Cybertruck roll off the line in Austin, Texas this month, so coincidentally,
Brand spanking
obviously,
new.
yeah.
So talk about that just a little bit. I know we're going to get into charging infrastructure, but I saw that also, and so I mean, like, I have an idea of what's really cool about that, but technologically, what is cool about that?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. The truck itself, if you've seen the truck, looks not like a truck. It looks like a very futuristic vehicle
Humvee,
of some
yeah.
sort. Yeah, exactly. Rugged and all of that. But what's really neat is the available features that are coming off of it, right? The ability to, much like the F-150 Lightning, to power your house in the event of a power failure or power outage. Maybe something that Texans might appreciate, obviously,
Yes.
with all the heat. But certainly what it's going to spur is a lot of activity around the accessorizing that can happen with the truck as well too. So think electric RVs or towable RVs, I should say, the campers that can come off of it, all of the exciting stuff that Tesla is known for certainly as well, self-driving, the autonomous portion of it, and just all of the really neat technology and infrastructure that's inside of the truck itself is going to be fascinating. Yeah.
We talked about battery last time. I
Yeah.
mean, we're talking about battery technology all the time, but the battery technology in this Cybertruck also leading edge, very advanced. Big part of the value proposition.
Should be.
Is it its ability to carry more battery?
No, I don't think it's the ability to carry more battery. I think, as we'll I'm sure get into later in our conversation, it's the charging ability of those batteries. How quickly can you
technology
recharge
of
them?
them.
Exactly.
Okay.
So a lot of that comes down to not necessarily the battery makeup itself, but more the technology that is used to charge those batteries, how quickly they can do that, and the power that they can then hold and turn into obviously range and eliminate range anxiety for customers.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay. Speaking of range anxiety, let's
Yeah.
talk about the current state of charging infrastructure. We did talk about this last time, and again, range anxiety. And so tell us where we are. Update us from the last time we talked a couple months ago.
Yeah, it's funny. It seems like that's going to be and continue to be probably the biggest gating factor to broad scale EV adoption. When you think of, I certainly have a lot of conversations, not even professional conversations with friends or family or other coworkers outside of work that, ask questions about, hey, when are you going to buy an EV vehicle, or do you have an EV vehicle? And the most common answer, or literally the answer you get all the time, is when there's more charging available.
Right.
So that will certainly continue to be the biggest thing. But the good news is we're making progress. And when you look at, obviously, the infrastructure bill that was passed, there is a lot of language in there for investment on infrastructure. And we're seeing it certainly from customers. Hopefully you're starting to see chargers pop up at malls or grocery stores, apartment complexes, public places. And that's probably step one in the process. Step two is going to be, how do they improve charging at your home? Rather than your 120 volt or 220 volt plug outlet that takes 8 to 10 hours to charge, getting to that next step of fast charging, that that level 2, level 3 charging that can get you the 15, 20, 30-minute charging that might exist from, say, Tesla supercharger or a level 2 charger out in public spaces. So we've got a long way to go. When people or experts talk about full-scale EV adoption, they generally consider that to be about 40% of vehicles sold in the United States. So once we get to that point, that would be considered broad-scale adoption.
Okay.
In order to get there, we need to quadruple or almost quintuple the amount of charging ports we have available to the level of millions of chargers. And right now we're in the, probably 20,000 level 3 charger ports, and I would say maybe about 126 to 130K ports of level 2 charging. So we've got a long way to go to get to that point. And if you think of the makeup of our country, certainly cities and large metropolitan areas will be the first to come. But again, in order for this to work, you've got to think about your farmers in Iowa or Nebraska, where there's not a lot of metropolitan area, but still need access to that infrastructure if we're going to talk about electric trucks, electric last mile delivery, electric agriculture vehicles, et cetera, right? So there's still quite a bit to accomplish from that perspective. But the good thing is there's funding that's coming, and we're seeing more activity around the building of those charging infrastructures. And then you're seeing some really cool stuff too from companies like Nikola doing hydrogen. So the fuel cell technology that's coming for more Class 8 trucks, and they're developing kind of a hydrogen pipeline essentially of available hydrogen fuel refill stations between Phoenix and Los Angeles for testing to see what can kind of be accomplished from that technology perspective, and giving a little bit more range as opposed to your traditional, hard to say traditional, but to the standard of a plug-in type recharge as opposed to that fuel cell technology.
And if we get a little more uptake there, then that relieves some of the pressure on just generally the EV charging stations, right?
I would think so. Yep.
So we have some funding coming.
Mm-hmm.
As the funding comes through, do we have the manufacturers for the capacity and the component manufacturers for this capacity? Is there a technology, I mean more in like a component type of a way, that we're going to have allocation, that we're going to have a problem with getting?
It doesn't seem to be that there's anything new that would be an issue, right, or a problem child component, much like the active chips or components that we've seen for the last, what seems like 4 or 5 years now, but really it's probably only been 2 or 3. Those will still continue to be challenged, certainly, because they do use them. But the type of chips that are being used for infrastructure, not quite as advanced if you think about what's needed for, let's say, a vehicle or your cell phone or something along those lines. The components that are going into those charging stations are much more focused on, obviously, power conversion and managing of the power that's going into it, but also communication. So think more of wireless communication, because again, charging stations are certainly ports for charging, but they're also data collection devices as well too. So a lot of communication type components will be needed for that as well too, along with standard electrical components that you would see in any kind of electrical box per se that might be out there from an industrial perspective. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Makes perfect sense. So not to worry. So more mass produced, a
it
little
seems
less
like
expensive,
it.
but there's technology there. But there's probably a lot of software technology.
There
that
is.
sort of thing also,
Absolutely.
Right? So
Yep.
a lot of communication that way. Okay, so we're behind a little bit. I mean, how are we behind? We're just not enabling. Do we have enough manufacturers to enable the kind of growth that we can now produce the automobiles? Now the public is beginning, and commercial, beginning to buy them.
Yeah. Yes, and I think more are coming.
Okay.
So you see companies out there like Electrify America, that if you're unfamiliar with Electrify America, that came about from the settlement that was reached with Volkswagen about probably 7 to 10 years ago now at this point, in relating to their kind of EPA scandal with diesel engines that they had. So their fine per se went into creating Electrify America, which is now all about charging infrastructure and green vehicles, or at least alternative energy vehicles. So a lot of investment happening by Electrify America and other consortiums that are getting out there to expand access to charging stations, which is really good. I think we're going to start to see the next level. For the federal government has obviously funded a certain level of the expansion from an infrastructure perspective, but I think the next level that we're going to start to see is more localized planning, even down to municipality level, right? Towns, cities, counties, states are going to have to put a strategy and an infrastructure funding, or in whatever format that looks like, whether it's rebates or incentives to help kind of fund and further along the expansion of those infrastructure charging stations will be coming.
Including the NAFTA component in that comment.
Absolutely, yeah,
Right.
yeah. And so funding is definitely going to be the name of the game. The infrastructure bill is a great start, but I still think there's quite a bit more that's going to have to happen from that perspective, outside of private investment. From a mall or from an apartment complex or something like that, putting those chargers in. So. And then from your point, the product perspective is really interesting because as we start to look at that infrastructure bill, a lot of the requirements that are in there are driven on a lot of the components being sourced here in North America or from NAFTA, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So suppliers, I think, not that they were caught off guard by that, but obviously haven't had the infrastructure in place to produce or to make or to finish goods here in North America that had existed previously. A lot of that was sent overseas, obviously, and we are seeing a big onshoring drive right now, especially to Mexico and even to the U.S. So when we talk to suppliers about the products that they have for charging stations, they all are aware of it. They all have plans for it, it seems like, but we're still probably 1 to maybe 2 years tops away from there being plentiful options of products that are manufactured here in the U.S. But they are coming, and they're very aware of that. So, yeah. So long story or big picture here, government definitely going to play a role in the expansion, and I think it needs to. But certainly a lot of private investment is going to come from that as well too.
So let's talk about that. I've been reading recently that there's trouble bubbling in the EV startups, and then I didn't really mean to tie that to .com bubble, but really it's sort of the same thing, right, with the SPACs and stuff. So what is going on? Consolidation, acquisition? Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think SPACs were certainly the hot thing to do a few years ago, and many companies like Lucid and a lot of other startup EV OEMs certainly followed that path to quickly get to the public marketplace. And what you're finding is that those companies are realizing just how difficult it is to not only design a vehicle from the ground up, but then be able to build that vehicle. And a key example of that is Lordstown Motors. I live in Cleveland, so that's been in our backyard. And watching that story unfold, from the exciting release of the product to the struggles and financial struggles involved with it, is one that's not unique to just Lordstown. Think Workhorse, Lucid, certainly, maybe not to the degree of Lordstown, but finding difficulty in ramping up that production of those vehicles, and then ultimately, quite honestly, finding a market for those vehicles. Lordstown really kind of pigeonholed themselves into building a truck for the fleet market very specifically, and not necessarily going after broader audience or customer base of just the normal consumer of a truck, where F-150s and Ford were able to step in very quickly, ramp up a production because the infrastructure existed, the funding existed, right? Big, deep pockets to be able to do all of that, and the relationship with fleets to be able to then say, we can also sell you that electric one to go along with that, internal combustion engine truck that you're buying from us as well too.
Uninterested partner already.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of the EV OEMs are going to go through kind of this lull, right? There's the excitement of the product release and new to the market and that kind of thing, and then from there it kind of starts to weed out into who can really make it, who has the right IP, who has the right funding, maybe partnership as well. It's going to be, we'll probably not seeing the first of the casualties. I'm sure there'll be some more coming. But there's also the possibility, I'm sure, of acquisitions, bringing in that technology or IP into a bigger OEM that wants to go acquire that technology that's been, so far produced. You see it happening quite a bit with some of the small battery pack manufacturers. I think of Romeo Power was one out in California that was recently acquired by Nikola, and ultimately, basically, they just absorbed the technology and kind of dissolved the company. So there will be more of that, and it's going to be kind of a hard landscape for many of those startups as they go through it. But I think they rush to get those companies on the public trading space was done a little bit in haste, as many people were skeptical of, and rightfully so.
And speaking of the battery, so that was going to be my next question. It's not just the people that were trying to build or hoping to build vehicles from the ground up. It is the third-party assembly people with new technology. It really goes throughout the industry at this time. We'll have to watch for those reliable and
definitely, all those devices that go into that vehicle, right? The IP that's owned by the battery manufacturers, the inverters, the DC to DC converter, any of the devices involved in a hybrid. Or not even hybrid, I'm sorry, an electric vehicle, system could be at potential risk. Yeah. Absolutely.
Lots of components there. So let's talk about Tesla. Who doesn't like to talk about Tesla? But fill us in on the adoption now, or is it a foregone conclusion? I mean, it is kind of, right? All
Pretty
the big
much.
guys have said we're going NACS.
Pretty much. There's a few holdouts, but as a matter of fact, I was just reading about it this morning. Volkswagen is one of the bigger automotive manufacturers by volume out there that have yet to adopt it formally. I can guarantee you they are evaluating it, and most likely, from the articles I've been reading this morning, are likely to follow suit as well too. And Toyota is kind of the last holdout, but Toyota tends to do things on their own and on their own time anyway. So not surprising there. But yeah, it was really interesting. You saw the most recent news. First was GM, obviously, to announce that kind of took the market by storm, I would say, and certainly was surprising. When you look at the NACS standard from Tesla, you think of those charging couplers. They're usually pretty big and pretty kind of bulky, a little heavy, a little hard to use, not very ergonomic for the day-to-day user. And what Tesla's design has done is it's very ergonomic. It's much smaller than say like the CCS1 standard or 2 standards that you see for level 2 charging, which again are those larger sized chargers, and they have the ability to charge significantly quicker than some of those standards as well too. Again, based on the IP involved with the battery management system and some of the other technology involved there as well. So unbeknownst to a lot of people, or very much under the radar, late last year Tesla open sourced that standard and made it available.
Mostly passenger vehicles?
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Great point. Yes, and it has been primarily passenger vehicles that have sent. I'm not sure and it is still remains to be seen what the Tesla Class 8 truck will have from a charging standard. But yes, it does seem to be right now just automotive vehicles or light duty trucks, that kind of thing. But when they open source that technology, not a lot of people made a big deal about it. That standard, I should say, not technology. And then when GM obviously announced. I think it really caught, especially suppliers, off guard. Not a lot of suppliers of the actual, charging cable assemblies and the terminals and everything else that's involved in making these were prepared for these large OEMs to jump on ship. So you saw GM, then it was Ford, then it was Rivian and Volvo, now Polestar, Nissan, and like I said, VW. So it seems like just about every single major automotive manufacturer jumping onto the NACS standard, which ultimately I think is actually a good thing.
It's a good thing for
the
consumer.
It is. And it's going to make it more available for more charging. And again, as we talked about earlier, expanding the network.
Can grow faster. Yeah.
Yep. So, and if it's a better, more efficient, easier to use standard, then absolutely that should be the standard that continues to expand faster. But there still will be a place for I'm going to call it the old standard, but for the CCS1 standard or the J1772 standard, which was the original standard for commercial vehicle use. I really do think that you'll see that stick around for last mile delivery trucks, Class 8 vehicles, and even into the agriculture, mining, off-highway applications because of the infrastructure that's already in place for them. But also it seems to be a standard that is more beneficial for that type of charging.
Technology-wise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As opposed to, your
more.
everyday use for an automobile or a light-duty truck or something like that. So it is very exciting, and I'm sure we're not done seeing all the news that's going to come out of it over the course of the next year or so as suppliers really start to scramble to get product offerings out there for it, which is good. So
It is good.
yeah.
I want to thank our listeners for plugging in with us today. And if you have some time, press play on our next episode where we're going to be joined by TTI Opto Specialist, Roland Chapa. He's going to join Gabe and I here in the studio, and we're going to talk about optoelectronics and transportation.
That's it for this episode of the TTI Distribution Download. For more information on any of the topics you heard about today, reach out to your nearby TTI branch at 1-800-CALL-TTI or visit us online at tti.com.